Regenerative agriculture. It's a phrase we're hearing more and more in food discussions, but it's never been entirely clear to me what it means. I think if you ask 10 people about regenerative agriculture, you might get 12 different definitions. I'm trying to understand better what it means to people who are actually doing it, and this is my first of what I hope will be several conversations. My name is Mike von Massow, and this is the Food Focus Podcast. Brian Alexander is a grass farmer in Kansas. He custom grazes cattle and is growing his own herds. He calls himself a sunlight salesman. We had a conversation on his philosophy and his approach to grass farming and grazing. I think you'll find it interesting. Brian, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to join me here and talk a little bit about what you're doing. Before we get started, why don't you take a minute and tell me about your operation. Before we talk about what you're doing, tell me where you're doing it.
All right. Well, first off, thanks, Mike, for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on your podcast. I am located in South Central Kansas, USA. We get about 20 to 21 inches or 20 to 22 inches of rainfall in a normal average year. Normal is a setting on a dryer, and average is just kind of a bunch of made up numbers.
No one gets an average, right?
Right. You know, it's never the same. I mean, 20 inches of rain this year will be totally different than the same 20 inches of rain next year, just because, you know, a little bit of difference in sunshine, a little bit of difference in temperature, and timing of rain matter. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm part owner and operator of a 7,000 acre cattle ranch down here in South Central Kansas. Primarily, I do custom grazing, and I've got a herd of about 80 of my own cows that I'm working on messing with some genetics and trying to get a small forage efficient grass-fed cow.
Okay. So one of the things that intrigued me, and after I was introduced to you, one of the things that intrigued me is that you call yourself a rancher, but you don't call yourself a cattle producer. You say you use cattle to manage your land resource. Is that an accurate reflection?
Yeah, and you know, labels have a place in this world for what they are. And you know, there's some labels that people willingly accept, and there's some labels that are pretty recognizable. And yeah, I'm a rancher. Then that's kind of like the simplest way you can describe it. But what I really do is I'm a carbon sequestration technician. I'm a used sunlight salesman. Caring for the soil and seeing the soil thrive and grow healthy plants and healthy grass grows healthy cows, grows good cows.
And essentially, I mean, I like that used sunlight salesman, but you're also harvesting your crop with something other than a swather and a combine. You're using cows.
Right. And my crop is one of the lowest cost crops there is. It's native grass. You know, and I'm just using that 4-inch wide mower on the front end of a cow to go pick it out of the ground.
So you are doing things differently than many ranchers. Why are you doing things differently?
Because I don't know any better. I kind of grew up as Dad was developing and getting into this rotation grazing system and this idea. So I've been around rotation grazing and, you know, the holistic management principles and hearing about biological cycling and water cycling and mineral cycling and nutrient cycling. I've been hearing that stuff for, you know, 30 plus years because my dad's been talking about it. So to me, using things like chemicals, like to go do chemical brush control. Yeah, I've been there, done that, tried it. Doesn't work. Like, it's a short-term Band-Aid, but they come back worse because you kill all the other good stuff there. But what I'm seeing is, you know, there's places where I graze at high densities with my cattle. I move often. The ranch is very well watered and subdivided and broken up. So I'm moving my cows every couple of days to a fresh pasture, and that getting herd effect, and they're getting good grass and staying on a high plane of nutrition.
So that's interesting, and I think in agriculture generally, and now more and more in ranching, we're talking about this here in Canada. A&W, big quick service restaurant chain, has gone entirely to grass-fed beef for their entire beef program, and they have advertising on TV where they have farmers holding handfuls of soy. Like, who would have imagined a hamburger restaurant with TV commercials with soil in them? So it's clearly we're talking about it more, we're thinking about it more, but it is to a significant degree a paradigm shift, particularly in ranching.
For the longest time, we view it as an extractive enterprise. It'll always be there. Grass will always come back. Well, if you continuously overgraze a pasture, there'll be parts of it where they never leave, and there'll be parts of it where they never go. You kind of have to force them to use a pasture effectively and not overgraze it, which is going back and taking that second bite.
I'm intrigued because it is. I think you're underselling yourself a little bit in what you're doing differently and how you're thinking about it. We're seeing more and more people sort of more doing a better job, sort of quote unquote better job of rotational grazing, thinking about it more, thinking about the health of that grass, thinking about the health of the soil underneath that grass, and thinking about, well, that grass is going to sustain me for next year and the year after and the year after, and I need to make sure that it can do that. And so, do you think that part of the reason you think about it differently is that you are a custom grazer, so you really are selling grass, and not, although you have some of your own cattle, but you really are selling grass and grasslands management, because you're selling feed essentially to these custom grazers. Or what brought you to where you are today doing it this way?
Well, like I said, I just don't know any better, and I kind of grew up as the system was evolving, and as I've taken over, let's see, it was about 15 years ago I moved back here, and I started pretty much taking over a lot of things 10 years ago, and the last 5 years I've been making all the decisions. And what's really kicked me down this path is watching what happens to some of these areas when you do get the cows on them for a day and you just smash them in there real tight and see what happens with their herd effect and their hooves. And I'm not doing any really high density grazing this year, taking a breather, seeing some of the results, making some observations. And, it's kind of on my mind because I answered some of these questions a little bit earlier today on social media about how many acres a cow. Well, how many acres a cow? Okay, I say I had a group of cows at about 4 acres a cow for the whole growing season. They're pretty tight. That's good utilization. This year I'm floating between 8 and 10 acres a cow, depending on which herd we're talking about. And depending on your perspective, that's either wow, 8 acres, that's huge. How do they need that much? And like, oh, you need 8 acres? Wow, we need 200 for a cow. So, the perspective across that varies so wildly, right? So we got to kind of keep a frame of reference in.
Yeah, and it's true. It's as soon as you talked about averages, and averages, nothing is average, but the truth is too that there is so much variability in cattle, in land, in season, and that a ranch that can do this stocking density will be completely different from another one, and time of year will make a difference. All of those things, I think, make a difference. So in the end, it gets back to the point I made, is that you have to adapt. That you're a manager. You're managing the asset. You look at what what grass is producing this year. You're learning, you're adjusting, and you're saying what works best for this situation, for these cattle in this year, rather than saying, I am this many acres per cow, that's the way I do it, and I'm going to do it come hell or high water.
Right. And, what I found is the smaller I make my paddocks, the more often I move my cows, the better the land looks long term, and the better the animals perform. So you take that to the logical extreme. Only give them enough grass for what they're going to eat for the day, and then move them off of it and let them have another piece. That's pretty labor intensive. That's kind of why we got away from it. But the best grass I've got is the pasture that I strip grazed 2 years in a row, and I've let rest since October.
So do you graze year round? Those of us here in the north, we have hard winters and we can't. Can you graze year round?
I can. We had, like everybody else, the big polar vortex back in February.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, it was rough. And my head count is a little bit lower than it was before then. Not ashamed to say that because I know most of my neighbors lost livestock as well. So that was kind of like a once in 10-year event. Most years, cattle are fine outside all winter long, no problem. They can handle the cold. And if they can't handle the cold, you probably shouldn't have that animal here anyway. It's not adapted to the environment. But that's a whole different discussion. So part of my theory is I challenge my cows. I pushed them a little bit hard over the winter. But yeah, we stayed on pasture, and the only time I fed any hay, we had a couple little snows in October right after I weaned some of the calves off, and I felt bad for them, so I hauled them a bale of hay. And then I didn't haul anymore until February, and we had that really bad cold snap. So what that was like here, we had basically a half-inch of ice on the north side of everything.
Yeah.
So the tall stockpiled grass that I left that was 2-3 feet tall, those stems and that old leaf matter, those old leaves, they caught all that stuff. And that left the south side bare and open, and the cows could still get down there to the base of the plants and still get a lot of good dry matter in there without having to fight through snow and ice. Mike, I even went out after that ice. I went out and I rolled out 3 bales. So a bale is enough feed for 40 cows for a day. Okay.
Yeah.
I rolled out 3 bales for my 80 cows. Figured have enough food for a day. They didn't touch it. They didn't touch it at all. They stayed out patrolling the pasture and eating grass that they could find underneath the ice. Then when it snowed, like 10 days after 10 days of that crap, when it finally snowed and snowed enough to cover everything up, I felt really bad for them. So I hauled a bunch of hay. I even hauled out 2 bales of alfalfa, and they freaking ignored the alfalfa.
Really?
Like it was 10 days later, and the sun was out shining. Everything had melted, and there was it was end of February, and they finally found the alfalfa bale and it started to go eat on it. The second one I rolled out. It's kind of ridiculous. I do also have to feed a lot of supplement protein in the wintertime because my forage is just almost devoid of protein in the winter.
Okay.
I've got about a 3-month period where I've just got to put protein out, and that's all there is to it because we don't have the climate and we don't have the plants to have any cool season protein during that time of year.
And you're using native grassland, right? You're not seeding this pasture at all.
That's correct. The entire ranch, I mean, other than some bits and bobs here, I don't own a tractor. I don't have a planter. I don't have a disc. I don't have a chisel ripper. I don't have a plow. I don't have any of that stuff. I also don't have a giant ass fuel bill. But I've had to get good at managing and learning how the native grass is every year because, like we said earlier, it is not the same every year.
Yeah,
it is like the most least uniform thing on Earth. One of the most complex, diverse ecosystems is the grasslands biome.
You have some sort of equipment you're hauling fencing around, or you're at least are you using mobile fencing to for small paddocks, or do you have all that fencing and you're just moving them between, or how are you managing that?
So we're primarily, like, I would call it permanently temporary fence. It's really cheap to build. I think most of it I've got built for under 14 cents a foot. It's like a real small diameter cable, galvanized steel cable, and fiberglass fence post. So that's my primary fence infrastructure. And I do have a bunch of poly wire on geared reels and bat latches and ring top posts for when we're doing high frequency moves, because that cable fence and those fiberglass posts, they're not necessarily ideal. They're not the most labor efficient way to get that strip grazing done. It takes a lot more labor to roll up and lay out that cable than it does a reel of poly wire. So that's why we do it. So I've made quite a few adjustments over the last 2 years, moving fences, putting in more fences, and redesigning the paddock systems that Dad had, so I can get across them in less than a half a mile with a reel of poly wire.
Okay.
So, I've got some of these paddocks that are, 150 acres, and they're going to be long and skinny. Well, then you got to have a lane back to water, or they're going to back graze. So there's a sacrifice in everything. But you also asked how I'd get around. Currently I have a John Deere side by side, and it's a pretty decent unit. There's some things I'm not happy with, and there's some things about it that I like. So, but it's
that's always the case.
Efficient. Yeah, it's fuel efficient. It's easy on fuel. I can get around almost anywhere I need to on the ranch. Keeps the dust. I can roll the windows up, turn the AC on, keep the dust off of me. I just can't go real fast.
Okay. Why have you chosen to ranch this way? It's different than a lot of people. What motivated you to take this approach? This sort of, some would call it regenerative, or maybe it's grass focused, or whatever you call it. What brought you here?
Like I said earlier, I've kind of been on this path, but it didn't have a name 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, even 5 years ago, everybody was still talking about sustainable. And it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of had the thought, like, we can't sustain this. This is so screwed up. We can't sustain this. We have to do something better. We have to regenerate. And I think that's about the time that, a lot of other people started using the term. Not going to claim I invented it by any means at all. We just kind of all, there was a community that just kind of centered on that as the new acceptable term, because sustainable, once we understood sustainable, that's not good. Like, we don't want to just sustain the current screwed up state that we're in, right? We want to make it better.
Yeah. I get exactly what you're saying, and you have to make it appealing to others, because you are selling grass as a custom grazer. You're selling grass to other people, and what brings other people to your farm? Or is it proximity? Is it that the way you're doing things? Is it?
Well, little column A, little column B, to be honest with you. So when I got started, Dad handed over his contacts to me, and I continued those relationships, one of them for another 2 years and one of them for another year. And, then I started to make my own relationships. Out here, the cattle business is, it kind of is built on long-term relationships. Yeah, there's a good old boy network. And there's a lot of things that are just simply based on reputation.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is. That's the way we have to do business out here, because, I'll do business with somebody 200 miles away based on reputation only. I'll do a lot of business based on a handshake with a man that I trust.
Mm-hmm.
It just has to be that way. So who I do business with, right now I have two clients on me right now, and one of them has two different herds, and then the other one, we've actually gone partners, and we've commingled our cattle, and we're running our cattle together. We kind of have a common goal that we're going to be working towards and breeding towards. So the guy that I'm commingled with, our mothers were friends.
Yeah.
He's just a few years younger than me. And we've known each other our whole lives. So, we've met. And then my other partner and we've been doing business together now for 13 years. Our fathers did business and ran cattle together back in the 90s. So we've met.
Yeah.
And he also runs the ranch north of me.
Yeah.
So he runs like a little over 10,000 acres, and he's got about 1,200 of his own cows that he runs. And I'm kind of like surge capacity, or if he gets, a good opportunity and calls me, he's like, hey, I need grass for, 200 of these for 6 months. What you got? I'm like, cool, we can make some money. So we've made a lot of money over the years, and it's a great relationship, and I really appreciate having him as a friend, a neighbor, and a business partner.
I was telling you in our introduction, Brian, that we have a quick service restaurant here in Canada that is differentiating on grass-fed beef and featuring their ranchers in their commercials. We're seeing cattle producers talking about grass, talking about managing grass in very much the same way that you're doing it, and they're differentiating on that. They're extracting a premium on that. Are you differentiating your cattle as being raised in a regenerative system, and do you think that has it either does now or has the opportunity in the long run to improve revenues for you?
I definitely think it does, but the hitch in that, Mike, is we got to cut out the middleman. That's where all the producer share of the beef dollar is going, is to all the middlemen. I don't really want to get off and yelling about the packers and how bad we're all getting screwed right now in the cattle business, because that's a whole nother show, right?
Yeah, that's a different discussion. Yeah.
Participation in the current system doesn't make you complicit in its creation. But it also doesn't mean that you can't make a better system. You can't build a better pathway to your customer. So finding that space where we can exist and continue to use the current system while rapidly changing to a more customer producer connected experience, I think that's the direction we need to go.
Well, and if you have that story to tell, that makes it easier. If you say, this is why we're different, this is what we're doing better, and what we need to be thinking about, then you have a value proposition to that consumer. To me, there are two elements of that change that you're describing, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole dramatically in this episode, but if you're trying to get away from a commodity experience, you need to do something different that creates value differently for the customer, plus then have the framework, the value chain that allows you to keep your cattle separate and extract that value. And this isn't unique to the beef business. In a commodity market, we put everything through that same funnel. And if there's any differentiation, it happens after that animal is hanging on a hook in a packing plant and they say, I can do this or I can do that. And it's mostly on size and marbling and grade and things like that. What we're seeing increasingly now is that sort of differentiation on production practice. I have a friend who runs a small packing plant who tenderness tests every single carcass that comes into his operation, and he can tell you, if you want this tenderness rating and this and this and this, I'll get it for you, and he'll sort for that. But in order to do that, each producer who grows cattle for him knows what each carcass does, gets a tenderness grade. They know what the feeding protocol is, and they can start selecting cattle for what. Now, in all of that, you still have to create the value that allows you to share more value, but it will require a change in structure of the system.
Yeah, and getting that information about eater satisfaction and eating experience back to the producer. I mean, I don't have to tell you, but that is a 3-year pipeline from the time I make a breeding decision it's 3 years before that calf is going to end up on a plate somewhere.
Yeah.
So I've got to do everything right for 3 years just to hear, oh yeah, it was a little tough. We got to do a better job of connecting the producer to the consumer. Small craft butcher shops, slaughterhouses like that, where the guy running it, can look at it, test it a little bit, and say, this is going to be a good one, and knows how to get the most value out of that for the producer. That's what we need more of. Like, we don't need another 6,000 head a day mega Holcomb plant built by Tyson, right? That's not what we need. We need 6,000 10 head per day plants. That's what we need.
Or something somewhere in between. But I agree with you. My last question, Brian, and then I'll give you a chance to say, Mike, you should have asked me this and you didn't. But one thing that we're hearing increasingly, and in fact, my last podcast episode was talking about the opportunity for carbon trading, for people who are doing things like you are doing, to not only get credit for the cattle you're getting out, but to get credit for the sequestration that you're doing. Do you see that coming? Do you think that's valid? And is it something that's interesting?
I think it's very interesting. And I think it is coming way faster than most people realize. There's a lot of challenges in that, right?
No doubt.
Keeping the middleman from, getting his hands too dirty in that stream of money. Making sure the benefit of that flows back to the producer, the landowner that's actually doing the work. The thing that really bothers me is you can have a commodity farmer that's been deep tilling and had a 2-crop oscillation and been just pouring the pesticides, herbicides, and all the fertilizers on it, and has 3 feet of just absolutely dead dirt. Can't call it soil because it's dirt. I mean, soil is alive. Dirt is not. They got 3 feet of this dead dirt that every year they go out and they put a seed, and then they put everything the seed needs to grow. They haul that out there with a tractor, right? Yeah, those guys need to get a little bit. Okay. If they change and they follow the principles and they start building their carbon, they start building their soil organic matter, and they stop the runoff, they keep their soil covered up, they put livestock back on the land. Okay? Are all the commodity crop farmers that have been supported for so long by crop subsidies and insurance, are they the ones that are going to get all this handout? And the cattle producers, the ranchers, the good stewards of the land that have been practicing good stewardship and managing our grasslands, are we even going to get recognized in that?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, we had this, like I said, my last episode, we had this exact discussion are the first movers going to be penalized because they won't be able to show an increase in sequestration? Right? I mean, you've been storing carbon for what you said, you've been home for 15 years and making decisions for 10. And if you have to show it as an incremental change to trade it, so there are lots of questions yet, but it'll be interesting to see it coming. And I think that it will in the long run mean more people will start doing what you're doing because they'll not only get the value from the grass they're harvesting, either as cattle or as custom grazing, they'll be able to sell the carbon credits as well. That also depends. I mean, in Canada here, we now have a carbon tax, and so farmers are paying attention and they're getting charged for the carbon they're creating, and so that might increase the motivation for finding ways to get carbon credits. So that has to happen too. We've got a ways to go, but clearly you're thinking about it. I think at the beginning you called yourself a carbon sequestration technician. You need to get paid for doing that too, don't you?
We're working on it. We're actually we're working on it. So let's just say your soil can sequester 1/2 ton of carbon per acre per year. Okay, I mean, in all honesty, that's not that much. Okay.
Yeah.
Right now, they're floating around there's projects that are getting funded, like they're going down to Brazil and buying a rainforest that wasn't going to be cut down anyway. They're buying a rainforest and they're saying, we sequestered this many acres of wood. Like, bullshit. Like, it wasn't going anywhere anyway. You didn't add to a carbon pool. You're not adding to a carbon pool actively. You're just saying, oh, these are my offsets. These trees won't be cut. But unless they were going to be cut to begin with, it's like fake.
Yep.
So, we have to work on the drawdown, right? Currently, the U.S. carbon market is trading around $20 a ton. Okay. So I ain't that good at math, but I mean, $20 a ton a year, and I can store an acre a year, and I got like 7,000 acres. I could figure that out without a calculator.
Yeah.
Now, here's the fun part, Mike. At the same time, I don't know what the current spot market is on carbon, but like the current offer in the U.S. is about 20. On the Euro market, it's trading at about $50 a ton. And I remember back in February, March timeframe, Bill Gates was bragging about that he didn't even know how much he paid for his 2020 offsets. It was between $600 and $1,200 per ton for his offsets. So, do I think there's potential in a carbon market? Do I think there's a lot of... Yes. My friend Hobbs Magaray kind of basically puts it pretty elegantly, and he says that if we were doing it right, cattle will be a byproduct, beef will be a byproduct of the carbon sequestration industry.
Wow, that's interesting. You may not be wrong at carbon prices that are getting higher and higher. And part of the reason for the price difference is probably the cost of emitting carbon in Europe is probably higher than it is in the U.S. So that the offsets
it all depends on where that tax is applied.
Yeah.
Like, it all depends where in the supply chain that tax is applied. Like, maybe we should start looking at applying the carbon tax at the wellhead. I mean, if we applied the carbon tax at the wellhead, everybody would pay it.
Yeah.
And everybody would have to pay their share. Single-use plastic would disappear overnight. I mean, you want to ban straws? You want to ban plastic bags? Carbon tax at the wellhead.
Yeah.
And I know saying that is not going to make me popular with a lot of my friends in the oil and gas industry. I'm prepared to accept that.
Yeah. Yeah, change is coming. So,
change
Brian,
is coming. I mean, get on the bus or get left behind. That's all there is to it. Either accept it or you're going to go the way of, I don't know, Kodak. Are they even relevant anymore?
I think they still exist, but they don't do much.
I mean, at one time, they were the biggest camera company in the world, $1 billion in sales. Where are they now? Like Sears. Sears failed to adapt to the change. Where are they?
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of examples. So, Brian, what should I have asked you that I didn't ask you, or what would you add to people who are learning about regenerative agriculture, thinking about producing beef differently? What points would you make to them to wrap up?
Oh gosh, there's so much to unpack there, Mike. Can I plug my podcast?
Yeah, I was going to do that at the end. I was going to give you an opportunity after this question to do that. So you can do it now if you want. Talk about where they can find you.
Well, that's why I started my own podcast called Ranching Reboot, is to answer those questions about, how can we start transitioning to a more regenerative system? How are people doing it? And my target audience for that, and I think I'm doing a fairly decent job, is the millennial that's been stuck in COVID lockdown and is really starting to question their food supply and where their food's coming from and about their food security, and wanting to get involved and take an active role in intentionally feeding themselves good food. So the podcast is called Ranching Reboot. We're on Apple, we're on Google, we're hosted on Anchor.fm. You can find us on Spotify. I think you can say, hey, Siri, play Ranching Reboot, or yell, Alexa, play Ranching Reboot. Not sorry if it just started playing in the background for you.
Good. And so that's great, and I've listened to an episode or two, and I would also concur that it's worth a listen, and I would agree that people are starting to think differently about food. And the last point I'm going to make is, you said that there are people who are thinking about where their food's coming from and that they want to eat good food. And I think the definition of good food doesn't include just what we put into our body, that it's nutritious and healthy, but that they are also concerned with how that food is produced increasingly. And being able to tell that story and tell why you're doing it is becoming a profoundly important element of the story that we have to tell people who eat.
Ag as a whole's got some problems. We got some environmental problems. But we've been really successful for the last 30 years of covering them up. You know, some of those practices are starting to come to light, and consumers are really starting to question it. For a long time, they were just taught, don't question it, don't question it. Don't worry about it. It's safe. It's good. It's healthy. It's awesome. Well, you know, there's people that are wanting to go and see it. Okay, you can come out to the ranch. I'll show you where my cows live all the time. Feedlots don't allow public tours, right? Because animal rights activists come out to my place, and I don't think they'd find a thing wrong. I mean, we'd probably end up having a good conversation. Drive on over to a feedlot, look, they'd go nuts. I'd go nuts.
So good. Well, that's what I wanted to cover today, Brian. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking forward to having another one soon. We'll have to get back together and talk about. I think you and I have a lot of things that we'd enjoy chatting about. But I'll close it there and say thank you very much. Remind everyone to go look for Ranching Reboot wherever you get your podcasts. And Brian puts out an episode approximately every Monday morning, and it's definitely worth a listen. So thanks very much, Brian, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's been an honor, and I look forward to a great many more awesome conversations in the future.
Perfect. That wraps up another episode of the Food Focus podcast. We very much appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you just discovered Food Focus, you can subscribe anywhere you get podcasts. If you enjoy the podcast, please give us a review. It helps others find us. Before we go, I want to thank my producer, Zach, for his hard work in making each episode sound good and for his original music that helps us transition. He does the hard work and we get to have all of the fun. Thanks. Have a great day.